Something that I think is important for people to understand is that one of the differences between like a normal brain, a non-traumatized brain, and a trauma brain really is that we have the same experiences, right? I mean, we have periods of joy, we have periods of sadness, we have periods of depression, we have periods of anger, we have periods of hopelessness, and all of that. That happens in both non-traumatized brains and traumatized brains. The difference is that when somebody has experienced emotional trauma, those normal human emotions tend to become more extreme, and we tend to get stuck there, right? We tend to get stuck there because there's a part there for two reasons. Part of it is that the thinking part of our brain, right, the logical part of our brain goes offline. And instead, we just get stuck in this emotional loop where it's just like when we feel rejected, for example, in a non-traumatized brain, there's this feeling of sadness and, disappointment and maybe a little bit of emptiness. And because the conscious mind doesn't go offline, right? I mean, this cognitive part doesn't go offline. We're able to just, go, oh, man, that sucked. Oh, well, maybe next time I'll be fine, right? And, or we may be disappointed and sad and, we talk to somebody and it's like, no, I'm okay, but I just feel really sad because, there's a person that I liked, for example, or I didn't get a job that I wanted, or somebody said something mean to me, or I wasn't invited to a party where everybody else was. So there's a sense of rejection, but we have the ability to talk about it with some degree of context, of perspective, right? And in a traumatized brain, that exact same experience is a little bit different because not only do we experience what a normal person experiences, right, with that sense of disappointment, but then what that does is that brings up this also this flood of emotion that is similar from a wounded part of our past. And so if we grew up where we experienced a lot of shame and a lot of abandonment and things like that, it's like that whole history that is not processed will come back into the present. And so we'll be re-experiencing a lot of those emotions in the present that actually came from our past woundedness. And so that gets layered on top of the normal response that we would have for disappointment. And when those emotions from the past come flooding back in, it kind of knocks the logical part of our brain, kind of the cognitive part of our brain offline, and we tend to just go into a complete emotional collapse. And so it's just like, our insides just feel like they're collapsing, right? Like, oh my God, I'm hated. I'm alone. Nobody wants me. There's just, and there's the inability to get out of that because with a non-traumatized brain, the reason why they're able to not go into that collapse state is that this, kind of this prefrontal cortex, right? The thinking part of our brain, the logical part of our brain is able to stay online and have some like, yeah, man, that really sucked. I wonder why they did that, we may feel sad for a day, maybe two, right, about that, but we never kind of lose our ability to have some logical perspective on it. We may be reevaluating whether, the person who rejected us is going to be a friend in the future or whatever, but when we have that trauma response to, in this instance, I'm just using rejection as an instance, but there's a lot of fear, anger. I mean, it could be a number of different things, but in this instance, I'm just talking about rejection, is that all of a sudden, all of our perspective goes inwards. right? We can't see context. We can't see nuance. We can't think about how, well, maybe they didn't have another seat at the table, maybe we had said something to them before, or maybe they're just having a bad. It's like we can't see any nuance. We can't see any context. We lose all perspective, and all of a sudden everything caves inward, and we're just like, oh my God, it's me, right? I'm the flawed one. I'm the horrible one. I'm the one that nobody loves. This is just another example of how nobody loves me and all of that. And we could just go into a complete emotional collapse. And one of the keys, right, of recovering from emotional trauma is being able to recognize when that is emerging, right? This is probably, if I had to rank all of the skills that are important for recovering from emotional trauma and to be able to navigate through emotional trauma in a more effective way in life, this is the most important. And I call these emotional inflection points, right? Where, we're going along fine and then something triggers, a trauma response, and we kind of feel a wave overcome our body, right? We can feel a wave of emotion, and whether that's rage, whether that's kind of an internal collapse, regardless of, or terror, freezing, going into a freeze response, being able to recognize the moment that wave starts, right? And if we were to look at kind of like a graph, so to speak, right? Or one of those EEG things, right? That measures brain waves or heart rhythm, right? Where, it's going boop, 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 and then beep. It's like the moment on that graph when we go from a straight line of being in a cool place and everything's fine and we may be stressed out about work or whatever, but we're not in a flooded state. And then all of a sudden it's like a little event happens, could be a big event, getting fired, or it could be a little event. Somebody talks to us in a particular tone or says something snippy, whatever. At that moment, all of a sudden, we can feel a shift in our emotional state. We could feel that kind of that wave start. That is called an emotional inflection point. And being able to recognize those is one of the most important skills in learning how to heal from and navigate through emotional trauma responses. Because there's a saying in neurology that what fires together wires together, right? And so, I mean, this is why, like if we're learning how to play an instrument or, learning how to swim or learning how to talk or whatever it is, learning a new language, learning how to do math, any skill, anything that we do, when we rehearse that, it becomes more wired in our brain. The more we learn how to write cursive, the more that those motor circuits in our brain start to strengthen, and the more that we experience anger, and the more that we stay in that angry space, the more that the anger circuits in our brain and the circuits associated with that start to hardwire together stronger and stronger, right? And so when we recognize those emotional inflection points, if we are able to observe that and start implementing a different strategy, right, for how am I going to navigate this without going into without becoming flooded by this kind of internal emotional collapse or getting into a state of rage and staying there, right? If I can recognize when this is happening and then start employing some strategies for remaining present, for recognizing these things for what they are, for creating kind of a space for those emotions to exist so we don't become flooded with them, the more that those emotional circuits don't, the more that we can avoid kind of the reinforcing of those flooding circuits, right? there's a lot more to recovery than just that. But being able to recognize when those things are triggered is super, super important. And so if there's one takeaway that I would give you from today is that learn how to recognize and make a note, actually. Learn how to recognize and just write down when you notice that feeling of flooding. Even if you can't stop it at first, just noticing that and just going, oh my God, I can feel it happening. And, write it down, utter it out loud. One of the things that is very helpful in healing from emotional trauma and dealing with situations like that is to be able to speak your state, right? Is being able to speak it out loud, just saying, oh my God, I can feel myself flooding, right? Because then it's like, I am recognizing and I am stating out loud that this is happening to me right now. And even though, you may not be able to stop it, you just got to go, oh, now I'm in a mess, or I'm feeling terrible or whatever. Being able to utter that out loud is a very, very important first step for managing those triggers differently. So I hope you found this helpful, and thank you very much for your time, and we'll talk to you soon.